Welcome and good morning. It's another edition of Shree's Sunday New York Times Read Along. Thank you to everyone who is watching on replay. You're catching the intro. My name is Neil Parekh. I am the executive producer and guest host of Shree's Sunday New York Times Read Along. Our guest today is Claire Smith, the first woman inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame's Writers Wing, a former New York Times columnist and current ESPN news editor. We are live on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube. Remember, if you're watching this show, particularly on Facebook or even on Twitter, make sure you click on the video itself. Press play on the video. So if you leave a comment, we'll see it. Of course, we will start, once we get going, we will start with tributes to Representative John Lewis, who passed away just the other day. So that certainly is something that's been on our minds. But we will also get to the rest of the paper and talk to Claire Smith about her career, her incredible career in sports. So let's go ahead and get started. Again, as I mentioned, my name is Neil Parekh. I'm usually the executive producer of the show, but today I'll be guest hosting. And it's an incredible honor, as always, to host Shree's Sunday New York Times Read Along. I've been working with Shree for about 3 years now. I still remember the first time that he asked me to guest host. What an incredible honor for him to give me his Facebook credentials and say, hey, log in and do the show for me. I can't make it. That was about 2 years ago. So thank you, Shree, for your support and encouragement in doing this. I want to check in with some of the folks that have joined us so far. Jonathan Borstein, of course, from Union Square. Thank you, Jonathan. Diane Stefani is joining us from Margate, New Jersey, usually. And then, of course, my mom, Sudha Parekh, watching from Hastings-on-Hudson, New York. Thank you, Mom. Always glad to see you. And she's wishing everyone a good morning. Please let us know where you're watching from and tag friends. Please share this broadcast. If you're watching on Twitter, retweet. We certainly want to get the word out. We have a great show planned for today. We also have Deborah Kerr joining us from Pennsylvania. So thank you, Deborah, for joining. We have a great team that puts together the Sunday New York Times Read Along, and ordinarily we show this card to introduce the team. Of course, Shree as the host, myself as the executive producer, guest host, and we have Paula Kiger, Julia Weeks, and we have Carla Baranakis as well. That rounds out the team. But today, we're doing something a little bit different. We're going to show all of them on screen. Julia, Steve, Carla, and Paula. And as you can see, we're all wearing our baseball caps in honor of Claire Smith joining us. We've got some Yankees, we've got some Phillies, some Twins for Carla. Paula's wearing a Detroit Tigers hat. I believe, Paula, that's your husband's team, right?
It is.
Yeah, thank you for doing that. This is, again, we knew that this was going to be a special show coming up, and we went with a Caps On theme for our team. But thank you very much. Paula Kiger usually watches and provides links in the Facebook group, Facebook page, Shree's Facebook page. Steve Taylor manages things in LinkedIn for us. I've asked Julia to watch on my Facebook page since we're streaming there this week as well. Thank you, Julia. And Carla has done such an incredible job getting guests for us over the last several weeks. And this week is no exception. She introduced us to Claire Smith, and we're so excited to have her join us. So thank you, Carla, for that great work. And if you have any questions, you have any issues with the broadcast, with the live stream, please reach out to Paula, Steve, or Julia, and they will be able to help you out. We still have a number of people joining us. Mark Lee from North Carolina, Anil Kumar as well. Patricia Freudenberg joining us from LinkedIn. So Steve, you'll be able to connect with her. Thank you, Patricia. We're Marilyn Zafer joining us from Staten Island, New York as well. So thank you, Marilyn. Please remember to keep sharing the broadcast. And again, thank you so much to our production team. We could not do this without you. Our guest, of course, this week, as I mentioned, is Claire Smith. We'll be having her join us shortly. But before we do that, we do want to take care of some business. We have some great sponsors that we want to acknowledge. And we're going to start with Muck Rack. As you may know, Shri has put together a Fundamentals of Social Media course working with Muck Rack. And you can get a free certification if you go to mrac.co/social. I took the course myself. I got one question wrong. I'm not sure what I got wrong. I think it was a specific data point. But it really is a lot of the fundamentals around Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube. If you're interested in learning more, if you're interested in brushing up on your skills, certainly take the course. And we want to thank Muck Rack for their support of the New York Times Read Along. They've been a sponsor for quite a bit now. We also want to thank Magic Bus USA. Magic Bus USA is another one of our sponsors. Magic Bus imagines a world where children break out of poverty and lead fulfilling, rewarding lives, contributing to their community and to the world around them. And as you can see, 7 out of 10 adolescents do not have a higher secondary qualification. 6 out of 10 youth do not have the soft skills necessary for employment. And 3 out of 10 girls are married before they reach the age of 18. Those are the stats. Those are stats from India, where Magic Bus does some great work. So thank you to Magic Bus for your support of the New York Times Read Along. In addition to Muck Rack and Magic Bus USA, we also want to thank Strategy Focus Group. Strategy Focus Group is a global team of human capital strategists committed to helping organizations solve people issues within your organization. They do that by working alongside you to solve your toughest problems and helping you capture your greatest opportunities. Thank you again to Muck Rack, Magic Bus USA, and Strategy Focus Group for your support of the New York Times Read Along. If you're interested in being a sponsor, please contact Shri Srinivasan. His email is shri@shri.net, or me, Neil Parekh. My email is neil@neilparekh.org. And if you'd like to learn more about our sponsors, please visit the links on their links to their websites: readalong.link/muckrack, readalong.link/magicbususa, or readalong.link/strategy focus group. Again, thank you for your sponsorship. Thank you for all the great work that you do. I also want to make sure, in case you didn't see it on the title card, to make sure to share the social media handles for our team. Paula Kiger is at Big Green Pen. Steve Taylor is at Steve DeReeve. Julia Weeks is at Julia L. Weeks. And you can find Carla Baranakis at CABARA at Kabara. Thank you again for a great production team to help us get through each week with the show. We have a number of other people who are checking in. Therese Steiner joining us from Yonkers, New York, a Cincinnati Reds fan. Go ahead and let us know who you like, who your team is for baseball. It'll certainly be a nice addition. Thank you, Therese. Ellen Austin is joining us from New York. Sujana Chandrasekhar is joining us. Nice to see baseball again last night. Despite the final score, I take it, Sujana, you're a Mets fan because the Yankees beat the Mets last night. Very happy to see that. Sujana is one of the hosts of She's on Call, which is a great show that we've started at 11 o'clock on Sundays, shortly after the New York Times Read Along. We have Sujana Chandrasekhar and Marina Kurian are the hosts of that show. You can catch it again at 11 a.m. And it's Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at She's on Call, the hashtag She's on Call. So certainly watch that for some great medical advice, particularly in this time of coronavirus. In addition to Sujana, our friend Stephen Kaplan is joining, saying good morning to the team and the New York Times Read Along family. number of other people who have checked in. James Baroud saying good morning from LinkedIn. Thank you. Anil Kamar from Kerala. Theta Pavis from Jersey City, New York. And Diane has some kind words for our production team. Thank you so much, Diane. Appreciate it. Jonathan is sharing that his mother was a Mets fan. Sorry, sister was a Mets fan, and mother liked the Red Sox. That must have been tough in '86 with the World Series. We may talk about that later. And who else? Mike Boris is joining us. Hey, Mike, how you doing? Go Yanks, absolutely. And Stephen Kaplan, Yankees with a big pizza pie in hand while watching. So we'll continue to share comments as we go. And what I'd like to do now, before we jump into the paper, because there's so much to cover, I want to invite our guest, Claire Smith, to join us on the stream. As I mentioned at the top of the show, Claire Smith is the first woman inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame's Writers Wing, former New York Times columnist, current ESPN news editor. She started covering the Yankees for the Hartford Courant at the time when I was watching the Yankees closely. I think this was the 80s. And she was sharing some great stories about the locker room in New York, some of her recollections. So we'll definitely get to that. We'll talk about her inspiration for becoming a sports writer, her perspectives on being a Black woman covering baseball, her thoughts on the George Floyd protests. But of course, we'll also talk to her about John Lewis, who passed away just the other day. But without further ado, Claire Smith is with us on the show. Claire, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Neil. And hello, all my friends there on the production staff. Thank you so much. This is
absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much. We're going to get right into it. There's a lot we want to cover today. We want to make sure that we spend time talking about your life and legacy, but we also want to talk about the life and legacy of an incredible icon, an incredible hero, John Lewis. Of course, as people know, he passed away late. The news broke late Friday night, and all of Saturday was really spent remembering him, honoring him, thinking about his work. What were the first thoughts that went through your head when you heard the news?
Well, my first thought was incredible sadness, obviously. Such giants walk this way but once, it seems. But my second thought was gratitude, because this is a man who dedicated his entire life from high school on through his home going to this nation. And it was a selfless, brave journey that he walked. And I think that the amount of love, outpouring, curiosity amongst the youngsters in this country about who John Lewis was and what he meant to this country, I think that has him smiling today. I think that he is seeing the legacy, the impact of his legacy, and it is with gratitude that I say, thank you, sir. Rest in power. You were a tremendous American and a tremendous world citizen.
Absolutely. I think that everyone should read. We can skip ahead, and I'm going to show it online so we can show some of the pictures. The New York Times editorial about John Lewis is a must-read. There are so many articles out there. There's a picture of him when he was arrested during the civil rights era. But if you scroll through the article, we'll get through some of the ads. I'm sorry, it's the obit that we want to share. That's the editorial is a great piece in terms of talking about his life and legacy, but the pictures are really in the obit. So we will get that for you just a moment. This is the piece that I want to share, just in terms of the images of his legacy, being beaten by a state trooper during the march in Selma, Alabama, and marching with the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King from Selma to Montgomery. That's him on the just to the left of center, with the fellow freedom writer James Spink after they were attacked by segregationists. The story of how they were attacked, they had a mob meet them at the bus station and just brutally attack people, men, women, and children, attacking them. John Lewis with President Obama at the 50th anniversary. We'll also be showing a video of his introduction to the president in just a moment. This was him and James Bevel again stood inside the door of a Nashville restaurant during a sit-in. What people don't realize, some people don't realize how young he was during the civil rights era and when he came to prominence. This is him at a sit-in in Congress when they wouldn't vote on gun rights legislation after the shooting. I want to end this part with a quote, with a tweet that that John Lewis had, which I think is very powerful, and I think it's worth sharing now. We're sharing again at the end. Do not get lost in a sea of despair. Be hopeful. Be optimistic. Our struggle is not the struggle of a day, a week, a month, or a year. It is the struggle of a lifetime. Never ever be afraid to make some noise and get in good trouble, necessary trouble. And he threw in the hashtag good trouble, and that's been a rallying cry for people. While he was with us and even after he's passed. What can you tell us, Claire, watching him, watching his career, watching his arc? Many of us only knew him as a congressman, as a elder statesman. You had the chance of seeing him evolve over time. What was that like?
Well, it's very easy to forget how young people were when they first got involved in such a great movement. He was 23 years old when he spoke at the Lincoln Memorial during the March on Washington. He was 23 years old and just wanted the world, and he wanted it yesterday. He wanted the equal rights yesterday. And the famous story is, of course, that Dr. King had to ask him to maybe tone down his speech a bit, because there were allies, but there were allies who were a little bit afraid of what a fiery call to arms type of speech would mean for the movement. And he adjusted, he compromised, he showed what a great future he would have in building bridges in Congress and making allies, perhaps that would somehow maybe raise an eyebrow or two, but for the greater good, he listened to Dr. King. He did what he felt was necessary, what Dr. King felt was necessary. And it was the start of a great life on that type of stage. He was an amazing young man who grew into an iconic leader, if you will, one of our elder statesmen. And it was just fascinating to watch. In the end, he got to do what Dr. King did not, what Malcolm X did not, and that's to grow up and grow old and influence more than one era in this country's history.
Absolutely. I'd like to share a video of him introducing President Obama, and just what an incredible moment for him to, thank God he lived to see President Obama be elected president and see that full arc of history. just, you know, and President Obama's words yesterday. It's an incredible time that we live in. And we'll talk about some of the challenges. There's still much work to be done, as we talked earlier, and we'll talk more. We've made progress. There's still much work to be done, but we do have the opportunity to celebrate the journey so far. Let's go ahead and watch his introduction of President Obama, and just enjoy that for a moment. See if we can find that video real quick. There we go.
On that day, 600 people marched into history, walking 2 by 2 down the sidewalk, not interfering with the free flow of trade and commerce, not interfering with traffic, with a kind of military discipline. We were so peaceful, so quiet, no one saying a word. We were beaten, tear gas. Some of us was left bloody right here on this bridge. 17 of us were hospitalized that day. But we never became bitter or hostile. We kept believing that the truth we stood for would have the final say. It is a great honor for me to return to my home state of Alabama, to present to you, not to introduce to you, but to present to you the President of the United States. If someone had told me when we were crossing this bridge that one day I will be back here introducing the first African-American president, I would have said, you're crazy, you're out of your mind, you don't know what to talk about. President Barack Obama.
Powerful, just powerful. You would have been out of your mind to think that he'd be doing that. We definitely want to continue to honor his life and legacy. We also want to talk about what's in the paper as well. I think that there's some really interesting pieces in today's paper, so we're going to go to that. Thank you for that note. Can you hear me now? I apologize. So let's just go back. This is the civil rights icon turned conscious of Congress in terms of the front page. Just a great photo in terms of the display photo with a dark background. And then I jumped ahead to page 20. This is where they continue their obit inside. We saw some of those pictures online, but that picture is from the march, the 50th anniversary event of the March on Selma. You see the pictures of John Lewis being beaten at the bridge, and then also here in this is in '86 when he became the second African American to be sent to Congress from Georgia since Reconstruction. In addition to this piece, I also wanted to show the editorial that I referenced, and we'll get to that in just a moment. And let's see, and interesting. So I guess it must have been in yesterday's paper, the editorial. They must have had that early, which is one of those things in terms of the timing of print and online. But these are definitely some good tributes, and I think there are some other Sunday Review items as well. So we'll get back to showing Claire on the screen. Claire, when you see the paper and you see these stories about the passing off the virus burden, et cetera, when you look at the combination, this is a great story. We'll look at Father Soldier's Son, about a veteran of the war in Afghanistan. What strikes you about the paper? What strikes you about the front page?
Well, I think that what served me well today, it was so necessary to have a piece like this, is Nicholas Kristof's piece about "In all the grimness, there is hope." And we need hope. We need the kind of hope that John Lewis never lost, because there are so many of our fellow citizens who are passing because of a virus, and those of us they leave behind will forever question if there was a necessity or even a dereliction that led to these losses, these unfathomable losses. But out of that grimness, out of those daily waking nightmares, if you will, comes a hope, because of how the nation reacted as a whole to George Floyd, how the nation has reacted as a whole in embracing our first responders, and also looking to science, if you will, to be the ultimate backstop on a disease, as well as it should be. We're encouraged to hang on, but also, in John Lewis's words, to make good trouble. And from the moment the tea went into the harbor in Boston, this has been a nation that knows how to make good trouble. And I think the millions who march and in outrage over George Floyd, but who, for the majority, did it peacefully, just as the protesters on the bridge, the Edmund Pettus Bridge, did so peacefully, often in the face of violent repercussions. There is hope. There is hope. And so many youngsters, so many youngsters who were born in this century, not in the last century, like we old folks who lived the 1960s, who watched the bloody battles that led to legislation that guaranteed voting rights, that guaranteed equal rights. We need that hope, and we need the reminders that brave men and women will step up and step forward.
And we have our friend Sonny Slaughter joining us. Sonny was a guest. We did a special edition on the 1619 Project back in August, where we devoted the whole show to that special project from the New York Times. And she has joined us several times since, including the Sunday after George Floyd was murdered. Sunny is saying she had the honor of receiving the Bell Hat Award from Harry Belafonte, along with Amelia Boynton Robinson. Amelia was the woman pictured who lay beaten and bloody in the ground on that day. She held my face in her hands and told me I have the torch. Just incredible, just very moving. And Patricia Freudenberg was sharing that she was crying of gratitude to see the video and to see all the coverage. And Janine, a guy saying so powerful and moving. Deborah Kerr, rest in peace. Several people also modify that rest in power, which John Lewis certainly is doing. One of the things that Sunny was saying, that's her in the wheelchair in that picture from the march, from the retrospective. Stephen Kaplan, we use the word a lot, but John Lewis was a hero, absolutely. So, and again, apologize for dropping the audio earlier when we started the front page. Carla, watching that introduction made her eyes well up. Zara is joining us from London. It is a very emotional time. It is very moving, as Patricia Freudenberg says as well. One of the things that I wanted to do and also share with folks that there are many heroes that we can look to, and one of them, Claire, had a significant impact on your career, on your arc, your decision to become a baseball writer, right? And you wrote about him, Jackie Robinson. He showed you how to fight on, not fight back. Can you talk a little bit about Jackie Robinson's role in your life?
I would love to, because I feel that his lessons are inextricably linked to what I've strived to learn throughout my life. Jackie Robinson, number 42, the first African American to play in the 20th century in Major League Baseball. Certainly not the first incredibly gifted African American baseball player, but the first one who was not relegated to a segregated world of baseball. There were two major leagues in the United States, of course, and two very proud major leagues, one being the Negro leagues and one being the major leagues, or the so-called the white America's baseball and Black America's baseball. We're celebrating the 100th anniversary of the founding of the Negro Leagues. And certainly you all are wearing caps today, and this is the year that we're tipping our caps and honoring the people who kept the national pastime alive in Black America while waiting for 1947. Jackie came along in 1947, signed by the great Branch Rickey to a contract with the Brooklyn Dodgers organization, signed in 45, debuted in 1947, and changed the face of baseball, changed the face of professional sports, and did something this country didn't dare do until the 1960s, and that was show peaceful integration can work, deserved every opportunity to work, and brought a semblance of equality and meritocracy to the sports world. So I always heard stories of Jackie. My mother was a Brooklyn Dodgers fan because of Jackie Robinson. And so I grew up hearing great tales of Jackie Robinson. I never saw him play. I have had the great privilege and honor of getting to know his widow, Rachel, the great Rachel Robinson, another American hero. And I also have become great friends with Sharon Robinson, who carries on Jackie and Rachel's legacy in an amazing fashion through education, through outreach, through the Jackie Robinson Foundation, which just encourages and brings along great young scholars, generation after generation of scholars. So I would like to share one story if we have time. And
Please.
okay, I grew up in Pennsylvania, and no, I wasn't a Phillies fan. Sorry, Steve. I was not a Phillies fan. I was a Dodger fan for the reasons I just spoke to. But as a third grader in Elkins Park, Pennsylvania, at St. James Elementary School, the nuns shepherded us to the church in the basement one day, and they wanted to show us a film. And that film happened to be the Jackie Robinson story, starring an incredible actress, Ruby Dee, and playing Rachel Robinson, and playing opposite her was none other than Jackie Robinson, playing himself. Now, that was the first time that this Jackie Robinson fan got to hear the voice, put a face to the headlines and stories that my mother had shared with me in my young age, and I was just infatuated. I just it might have been the most incredibly uplifting experience outside of watching my parents survive and thrive in the early 1960s. My parents, to me, were Rachel and Jackie Robinson, but there was Jackie talking to me through that film. I never forgot that experience. I always wanted to know more. I always wanted to know more about the game that asked Jackie to join in a great experiment. And I wanted to know more about the man and the wife and the family that had the courage to do the bold things that they did to help America understand the possibilities of equality. So I carried that on through, and it turned into a mission, which turned into a career. And because I don't really have a lot of imagination, it's a career that's still going. I can't think of anything else I'd rather do at this point. So from 82 until now, I've been involved in sports journalism, specifically involved with the coverage of baseball.
Absolutely. And I think there's some really fascinating history there. You were telling me about your experience as a Black woman and how players kind of looked out for you in the locker room, right?
Yes. When you talk about baseball in 1982, as opposed to baseball in 2020, I walked into an entirely different environment than one that exists today. On the one hand, there were precious few women reporters covering the game or covering any of the games for that matter. On the other hand, baseball was more in line with, say, the NBA and the NFL in terms of Black athletes' participation. So when I walked in, I felt an uneasiness about being one of the few women spread few and far between within the sport. But in terms of being African American, I saw a lot of players who shared my background, if you will, African Americans, It was still the tail end of the golden era of African American participation in baseball. So the first team I covered, it housed, if you will, Willie Randolph, Dave Winfield, Don Baylor, Ken Griffey Sr., Oscar Gamble, Billy Sample, and on and on and on. And if you fast forward to 2020 or 2019, the last season that actually we can look to, there were 11 teams that had one or fewer African American players on it. So it's a different environment. I think that it makes it a little more challenging as a Black reporter in that you're constantly asked to speak to issues that the players themselves are not necessarily comfortable in speaking to. Is there a Colin Kaepernick in baseball? Not yet, because as Adam Jones said, they can be made to disappear because there is not a strength in numbers. So you have this kind of yin and yang. Was it harder to be a woman or an African American? That's a question I was asked a lot over the years. And early on, it was definitely harder to be a woman. And now maybe that's flipped.
The assignments that Black sports writers got, they weren't encouraged to cover baseball, were they?
They weren't encouraged. I think that's kind of a proactive statement, Neil. I think that there was just a mindset that had editors and reporters saying, where would this person, this talented young writer, best serve us and serve him or herself? And the easy answer was, well, let's send them to the sports where there are minority majority players, because we can say that they can relate better, or they speak a similar language, and on and on and on. I think the challenge would have been to go and prove that you could cover anybody in any sport. If the sport had never had a Black athlete, a Black coach, a Black manager, that's still a sport worthy of the most talented reporters, and reporters who picked up that baton, if you will, reporters like myself and Larry Whiteside, and going all the way back to Wendell Smith and Sam Lacey. It was such a rewarding career because it was a challenge to do so, to be the eyes and ears, to be the person who was willing to introduce diversity, not only in the press box, but also to show what diversity meant within the sports we were covering, or what the lack of diversity meant in the sports that we were covering. So was there a purposeful segregation of reporters? I don't think it was purposeful. I think it was easy.
Which is interesting because some of the criticism in the last few months and really years around journalism and the decisions editors are making is that they feel, Black reporters would be too biased to cover the Black Lives Matter movement or to cover topics. There's that question: can you be objective if you're covering a topic that is that you identify with, that you have background on? And that's something that's been unique to Black journalists to a certain extent. You don't see that with other beats, people who have experience, whether in business or whether in arts or et cetera. But if you're a Black journalist, at least the last several years, there are questions that are raised about objectivity. So again, we're being joined by Claire Smith, the first woman, only woman to receive the J.G. Taylor Spink Award from the Baseball Writers Association of America. You know, we're having a great conversation, talked about John Lewis earlier, talking about journalism and the role that Black journalists play in the decision-making some of the editors have. So you were going to speak to that last point, Claire, in terms of bias, quote unquote.
Yes,
bias.
and I know that our friends, our peers out in Pittsburgh have really had a hard time with this, with a photographer, a noted photographer, and a reporter being removed from the coverage because they were basically seen as being biased. Well, if being biased means that you have certain skin color, there's nothing you can do about that. As the saying goes, there are only two things you have to do in life if you're Black, and that's stay Black and die. Okay, so you're holding it against someone for being Black and having the nerve to cover stories that involve Blacks. That's just condescending and stupid, short-sighted, and I don't want to be too outspoken, but it's just plain dumb.
Fight on, Claire. Fight on.
If you flip it around, I guess that means that all the white reporters who cover predominantly majority outfits, like, say, the U.S. Congress or the Trump administration, are really biased because they're white and those organizations are predominantly white. So
we should put more Black reporters in the White House press pool.
Yeah, send in the Black folks. Joy Reid, go get them. So,
we have a question, a comment from Mark Lee, a colleague of ours, a regular viewer from North Carolina, home of the Durham Bulls. I am of the opinion that the Black press and the Negro League in their early days worked closely together. Claire, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, absolutely. Did work closely together. Wendell Smith was, first of all, the Black press advocated for the integration of baseball. So you're talking about analysis and columns and the push for equality. That's part of journalism too, to advocate for what is right. Do you give people what they want, or do you give people what they should read? That predated Jackie. Wendell Smith traveled with the Brooklyn Dodgers, and he was asked to be Jackie's companion in '47 because there were only two folks who weren't allowed to stay in the hotels, eat in restaurants. And that was Wendell, that was Jackie. I can't imagine the loneliness of that ride and the intimate conversations they must have shared, because they did have that one thing in common. They were always going to be Black, and the only other thing they had to do in life was die. So how can you separate out the two? Of course, there was a bond. They were inextricably linked. That doesn't mean that Wendell Smith didn't write it hard, write it tough when he had to. But then again, you look back at journalism as a whole, especially sports journalism back in the day. Was it at all like journalism today? No. There's a famous story of how when teams traveled on the trains, the reporters were right there in the sleeping cars and everything with the men that they covered. And the one story, urban legend, I don't know, but two reporters sitting in the bar car watching a young woman chasing after Babe Ruth, supposedly with a sharp instrument, saying to each other, "I'm glad we didn't see what we just saw." It was just a different relationship, a different world. Would Babe Ruth or Jackie, for that matter, have survived the 24/7 social media driven world?
No.
Heavens, we'll never know, will we?
Yeah. I want to call out Sonny's comment, because I think that's a huge honor. Neil and Claire about to get in some good trouble with pushing for more Black press at the House. And even Mark Lee was talking about maybe we should have more Black reporters at NASCAR. That whole Bubba Wallace story would have been handled very differently, I think, than it was. Therese Steiner had an interesting comment. She's working on a documentary on Cuban-American baseball scout Alex Pompez, and who scouted Juan Marshall, Orlando Cepeda, Willie Mays for the New York and San Francisco Giants. Have you interviewed any of those players?
Certainly have. I've interviewed Orlando Cepeda. I've interviewed Juan Marshall. I just hosted some tributes to the late Tony Taylor, who passed away this year, and was one of the fellows who really put a human face on the Cuban baseball product. These are proud men. These are men who faced adversity in so many similar ways, but unique ways, in that they were basically parachuted into America, many of whom not being able to speak the language, left on their own in these tiny little minor league towns. And it didn't matter if the towns were north of the Mason-Dixon or south of the Mason-Dixon. If you couldn't speak English, as Tony Perez once told me, you spent a lot of meals just ordering the one word you could say, hamburger. So it's a completely different world, in that teams now are mandated to have interpreters, not only for Hispanic players, but Korean players, Japanese players. If there's ever a player from England, I'm sure we'd have to have an English to American translator. So yeah, it's a lot easier now. I'm sure Eduardo Perez, my compatriot at ESPN, will look at what his father had to go through and then compare it to his own travels through major leagues, and never ever think that he had it as tough as Tony did. And yet Tony and Orlando, they're Hall of Famers, and they earned that. They had as many hits and setbacks plus more, and still they made it because they're great competitors.
Absolutely. And what I would also follow up to the question about the Negro Leagues, Apollo was asking about, is there a museum someplace with records and memorabilia? And Paula Kiger, our producer, wanted to see what you recommended, but immediately went to the Negro League Baseball Museum.com, which I certainly can endorse. And if you follow the president of the Negro League Baseball Museum on Twitter, NLBM Prez, you'll get some great tweets. It's a great history lesson, a lot of focus on the greats in the Negro Leagues. He definitely keeps up the legacy of that work.
Absolutely.
In that era.
Bob Kendrick is an amazing guardian of the of the legacy. The museum was founded by Buck O'Neill.
Buck O'Neill, yeah.
Yes, and again, I remind that this is the 100th anniversary of the Negro Leagues. It's being celebrated. Sadly, a lot of the exhibits and celebration had to be put on the shelf because of the virus, of the pandemic. There were a lot of events planned across Major League Baseball. This was going to be a big to-do for not only the museum, but the surviving members of the league. And now it's kind of taken off into the virtual world. But Bob Kendrick certainly hopes to come back strong with his tipping your cap in salute to the men and women of the Negro Leagues. And there were 3 women who played Negro League baseball, thank you, including Toni Stone, who, a little known story, I think, undertold story. Toni Stone played for the Indianapolis Clowns, and she succeeded a youngster at shortstop after that youngster was signed by the Milwaukee Braves. The youngster's name was Henry Aaron. So these were tough women, and I am so proud to know that they walked the walk, if you will, and played hardball and carved their own place in history. But Buck O'Neill is, as we know, was a great ambassador for the Negro Leagues and the Major Leagues. And come this fall, he will most likely be on the ballot for the Hall of Fame again. And hopefully this time Buck gets his place, a rightful place in Cooperstown.
Absolutely. And for everyone who's watching us, who may have joined us midstream, just want to remind you, in case you're curious about who our guest is, and we're focusing quite a bit on baseball, but a lot of it is baseball history and the role of African Americans, about Blacks in journalism and in sports. Claire Smith is the first woman inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame's Writers Wing, former New York Times columnist, current ESPN news editor. And if you joined us partway through, certainly encourage you, when we finish the show, go back and watch the beginning. We started with a tribute to Representative John Lewis with some videos, with showing several pictures. Claire offered some remembrances as well. So certainly encourage you to go back and watch that if you can. What I'd like to do, Claire, is at the 9:30 mark, get to a little bit of the paper, because there's certainly some good content we want to cover there. So we're going to go ahead and do that. Talk about what's in the paper, and I'm going to focus, and I'm going to make sure, in case there are any audio issues, I know my production team will give me a heads up right away, but so far so good. So as far as the paper is concerned, we looked at the front page earlier, and looked at the John Lewis section. What I want to do is to make sure that we look at this really important piece, Father, Soldier, Son of, I believe it's called, this really strong piece by the Times, that they followed this family for 10 years to tell his family's story, focusing on his children, Father, Soldier, Son, of course, and they've turned this into a documentary streaming on Netflix. So certainly want to encourage you, but just to see what they've done in print, just great photographs, a lot of white space, telling this family's story from being apart, from the kids having to deal with being in school, homecoming, which you can just see in terms of in the photographs. What an incredible project, a 10-year project to focus on this one family and tell the story of the last 10 years of war in Afghanistan, there are so many stories like this out there, and they really focus on the heartbreak. I am showing you the full piece. I encourage you to look at it online as well. There are incredible stories in here, incredible stories about his family that I want you to watch. I do not want to give it away because it is heartbreaking, and it would take away from the power of the story. But please take a moment to look at the story and go through the end, and let me know if you are able to avoid shedding a tear on that. The Sunday review section, some really great pieces. The front page, to stop hate, we have to understand it. One woman's descent into white supremacy, which is just incredible. I do want to note that last week's guest, Mary Curtis, another former New York Times writer, told us about how she covered the Klan. She would go to cross burnings and hang out with the Confederate reenactors to understand what they're doing, and certainly tempted fate with that. Definitely go back to watch last week's episode with Mary Curtis, another guest that Carla Baranakis was able to arrange for us. This piece from Washington State, I won't risk COVID to teach your child. This is a teacher who is, struggling with this push to reopen schools, seemingly at the expense of our teachers' health, which is really challenging for everyone to consider. This is the piece on this woman's descent into hate. Karina Olson at her home in Federal Way, Washington, another Washington-based story. I lived in Washington for 15 years in Seattle and actually worked in Federal Way for a time. And this is the rest of the New York Times Sunday Review and a piece by Ross Doubt that the real white fragility. Does the white upper class feel exhausted and oppressed by meritocracy? Certainly interesting to read. Talking a little bit about the epidemic, Claire, about coronavirus. I'm curious about your thoughts on the baseball season opening up and how Major League Baseball is handling that.
Well, yesterday was such a breath of fresh air to see baseball games being played, exhibition games, and we're just a few days away from the Thursday lid lifters, if you will, which will be shown on ESPN, my current employee. I'm really curious. I was reading a rather whimsical report in the sports section about how baseball players are being asked to do the unthinkable, not spit, not high five, not sit next to each other, whisper. Umpires and catchers are trying to figure out if they need to wear masks under their mask just to protect the batter. And you'd think they would all be opposed to one another, but this is life and death. It's not anything to be taken lightly, and to just see if the machismo, if you will, will run smack dab into the face of players saying, "No, I'm wearing a mask." Clint Frazier of the Yankees has been called all sorts of things on social media because he's chosen to wear a mask. The guidelines for baseball to get into this season, the guidelines drawn up by the management and by the Players Association, it's only 132 pages. So if you have time in your spare time to read such a tome. I'm sure that the players have all read it from end to end. I think that the opt-out, which players will have a right to do during the season, that list is going to be really greatly scrutinized. There are already some amazing talents who have opted out for this season, starting with Buster Posey, who's he and his wife have adopted twins, and the twins were born prematurely. So Buster says not even a tough decision to decide to stay with his family. Ian Desmond of the Colorado Rockies, on his way out the door for 2020, had an incredible statement about how he was walking away not only because of coronavirus, but because of the homophobia and racism in baseball. And he just sounded like a man who's burned out and needs some time. An African American who's trying to come to grips with the loneliness that has enveloped him in his career. So there's so many different levels to this conversation in baseball. The other sports, I'm sure, will be watching carefully. America also got to look in the mirror yesterday and see just how much of an outcast the nation is when the nation of Canada told the Toronto Blue Jays that they cannot play games in Canada this year. And that's not because Canada has a coronavirus issue, but because America has the issue, and that just asking American teams to self-isolate for 14 days before playing one game in Toronto is just not a feasible thing. So right. The Blue Jays will be the road warriors of 2020. How that team handles it, how it might drive some of its, that decision might drive some of its players to opt out, I would imagine. It's all a great, great unknown. And
yeah,
we shall see.
And I wanted to pull up Lippy Roy's comment. One positive of the pandemic of the rules, Major League Baseball's banning of spitting, which Lippy Roy is a physician and has been on our show multiple times talking about COVID-19, talking about addiction issues. She's also a Toronto fan. I know she's a Maple Leafs fan, presumably a Blue Jays fan. But that idea, the way that it was the local, the city and the province were okay with it, but it's the federal government in Canada said, we're not going to have the team flying in and out of the country and have other teams flying into the country at this time, particularly if they're flying to hotspots like Florida and other places. So it really just does highlight some of the challenges that we have. Thank you, Patricia. Although she misses Shri on today's episode, she's thanking me for my job hosting. Again, as folks, to remind folks, Shri Srinivasan is the host of the Sunday New York Times Read Along. I'm the executive producer and occasional guest host, and it's always an honor and a privilege to host the show on Shri's behalf. One of the articles that I wanted to make sure that we got to, and I want to thank Ellen for pointing it out to us and making sure that we look at page 2 in the style section. This story about Jane Elliott. If you know the story, Claire, she did the experiment in a school around blue eyes and brown eyes, and suddenly it's back in the news. So we're going to take a look at that real quickly. And if you follow the link, I know our team will share the link to the story. There is a YouTube video. It's a 25-minute video, so I didn't cue it up to show, but to show exactly how that experiment played out. Do you remember that experiment? Do you know the story behind that?
Not offhand. I'm looking forward to reading that today.
Absolutely. So we'll get to that in just a second. So let's go back to the newspaper, and we'll take myself off the screen as well. So there's this story here. It's Blue Eyes, Brown Eyes, 60s lesson revived. And we'll just clear off on the screen. So the day after Martin Luther King was assassinated, schoolteacher Jane Elliott scrapped her lesson plan, teaching third graders the Sioux prayer about not judging another person until you have walked a mile in their moccasins. For this experiment, she split the children at her all-white school in Iowa into two groups, brown-eyed students in one and blue-eyed students in the other. And both members received treatment based on that one arbitrary quality. Over the course of 2 days instruction, she convinced the blue-eyed students they were not as smart, worthy, or human as their brown-eyed peers. It demonstrated for the students how easily prejudice could be learned. What she said, racism is ignorance based on being miseducated, she said in an interview in July. It's the result of being indoctrinated instead of educated. I don't sugarcoat racism. What's interesting is that this story is coming back. She'd been on Oprah, the conversation with Angela Davis. Now in the midst of Black Lives Matter, it's getting a lot of attention. Someone watched a video a few weeks ago and shared it on Facebook and raised all these issues again. It was certainly a powerful experiment. I remember reading about it in school and talking about it, but just that idea of being arbitrary. And there are other experiments as well in terms of, I remember there was one experiment where a group of students were arbitrarily split up, and one were given the power as jailers effectively, and the other were prisoners. And that had profound impacts. And if I'm not mistaken, that experiment had to be shut down after a few days because people really took that to heart. Claire, I think I saw you nodding your head. Do you remember, that experiment as well?
Yes, I believe it was at Stanford University.
Yeah.
If I'm misidentifying the university, I apologize. But yes, it was quite infamous, the result of that, and it showed how easily power can corrupt. And if you have the whip hand, that power goes to your head. And if you're on the receiving end of that treatment, how it breaks you. It just breaks you. And the experiment was one of the more eye-opening and infamous experiments of its time, that's for sure.
Absolutely. And Sonny Slaughter is saying that Jane Elliott has been a leader on racial bias, racism, and cultural sensitivity. And Ellen was sharing that the video is fascinating, that it really should be seen, and I certainly agree. We have the link to the article in the website, and I'm sure we can find the video as well for folks. I think it is in the article. So thank you for sharing that with us, Ellen, and encouraging us to look at that. Yes, it was a Stanford experiment, and that was very powerful. Mark Lee is sharing that it sounds similar to a doll experiment where young Black ladies were given a regular Barbie doll or a more Afrocentric doll and were asked which was more beautiful. Certainly it will give that sense, but doesn't have that same, the power of that Stanford experiment was incredible. There are several other stories I want to make sure that we get to. One of the things that we are talking about when it comes to race, and we're focusing on, we're looking at, how race plays out in all sorts of venues. Here's this piece on classical music, that 9 Black performers on the concrete steps needed to push past lip service and begin truly transforming a white-dominated field. and there's one recommendation on ending blind auditions for orchestras. The issue of blind auditions is really, really interesting because I remember that there was a question of trying to get away from gender bias, and even though they had blind auditions, the judges could tell when women walked on the stage because they were wearing heels, and then when we're wearing flat shoes. So it's not always possible to get around that kind of thing. And we'll look at the stories inside. Here's the Black artists aim to change their world. Some great portraits. You have Monica Ellis, a bassoonist, and Tanya Leon, a composer, Thomas Wilkins, a conductor, Jesse Montgomery, a violinist and composer, Roderick Cox, a conductor. This is the picture of him as well. I'm focusing on this because this is one of the things that you don't see coverage of Blacks in this space, in this milieu. If you go back, I'm sure that there's a history of how Blacks were shown in the media, in the paper, and it's important. It breaks the stereotypes, and it shows people. Before we leave, Carl Reiner, Decently Perfect by Steve Martin. Certainly, Carl Reiner passed away, I think it was last week, that we saw as well. So we definitely want to honor his memory. One thing I want to show folks is in terms of the print paper, which you wouldn't see online. I thought this was interesting. There is a New York Times printing plant in New York, in College Point, and Sri did a tour there. Is one of the few printing plants that can print this gatefold piece, an 8-page layout. If you can see this, I'm trying to get it as wide as possible. 4 pages both sides, and in this case, they did it for an ad for Figs, celebrating the doers, the risk takers, the one who inspire us to do more and try more. And it's an ad for masks and PPE. Let your success be your noise. Now, this is interesting that here they're showing an MD without a mask. So I'm not sure what is going on. Why wear scrubs when you can wear Figs? Again, just an interesting approach to advertising, and a little bit confusing potentially. And it looks like it's you can fold it either way and open it either way you want to. What else do we want to show? Certainly the New York Times Magazine. We like showing the magazine in particular because the New York Times has started showing the making of video of the cover. So we'll certainly share that. And we'll just have that teed up for folks. So give me just one moment here. I am teeing that up left-handed because that's what you do when you guest host and produce at the same time. But we will certainly make it work. So let's see if we can get that lined up and get that on the screen for you. So there's the magazine, and here's the video.
Times Magazine. This is behind the cover. Our cover story this week by Janine Interlandi is about public health. A few weeks after Janine first started working on this story in April, there was optimism that the coronavirus outbreak might be contained. But by mid-June, as cases continued to increase, it was clear that the lack of funding in public health exacerbated the crisis. Our photo department wanted to work with Austin-based photographer Raheem Fortune. They knew they would need someone who was very sensitive to go into this particular situation. They also thought he would bring a lot of humanity to it. We considered an image of a nurse suiting up in PPE for the cover. We also looked at images of healthcare workers caring for patients, but landed on this image of a registered nurse, Pamela.
I'm going to start that again just in case I didn't have the sound. My apologies for that.
really simple because we felt. From the New York Times Magazine, this is Behind the Cover. Our cover story this week by Janine Interlandi is about public health. A few weeks after Janine first started working on this story in April, there was optimism that the coronavirus outbreak might be contained. But by mid-June, as cases continued to increase, it was clear that the lack of funding in public health exacerbated the crisis. Our photo department wanted to work with Austin-based photographer Raheem Fortune. They knew they would need someone who was very sensitive to go into this particular situation. They also thought he would bring a lot of humanity to it. We considered an image of a nurse suiting up in PPE for the cover. We also looked at images of healthcare workers caring for patients, but landed on this image of a registered nurse, Pamela Miller, who was photographed at St. Joseph Medical Center in Houston, Texas. We did a lot of different typographic options for this cover, but we ended up using something fairly simple because we felt that the most important thing to take away from this image was just being able to see the expression on the nurse's face. I think all of our other covers have basically shown healthcare workers as being heroic and their amazing efforts. But at this particular point, as the pandemic wears on and cases keep coming, we also wanted to show just the incredible toll it's taken.
Thank you for that. And this is the issue of the magazine that we're looking at with the cover story that we just saw. And one of the things that we like to do is also read the poem. So it's one thing we haven't done in a while, but Claire, we like to honor poetry. We like to share that with folks. And one of the things that Shri says is that a poem should never be read by someone cold. It should be usually read by the poet because they understand exactly how, what the pronunciation, where the emphasis should be, etc. I cheat a little bit and read the description at the top. And so this poem is selected by Naomi Shihab Nye, who is the Young People's Poet Laureate of the Poetry Foundation in Chicago. We stayed inside so long, the moss is calling us. The leaves, the little flickers, bow down. Major Jackson's mesmerizing fifth collection, The Absurd Man, conveys profound physical presences, connection to earth and memory, a deepest need for embodied contact in this often ridiculously abstracted modern world. His lush language invites us into the exquisite realms here at our feet, or beyond that tree there in the cracks between the old stones. Take it in, be fed, feel close to something elemental again. So here is the body's uncontested need to devour, an explanation by Major Jackson. I am bathing again, burying my face into the great nations of moss. I am leaning in, smelling the emerald mountains and the little inhabitants crossing over rock-like boulders and tree trunks empired bit by bit. My nose must come to them like a probing spaceship causing a mighty eclipse. They speak in whispers, but do not shriek when gazing into the dim landing bays of my cavernous thoughts. I am grazing, like a Dionysian. I come not with religion. I come yearning for first spring and a thirst for spores, pooling like mercenaries in the dark. The little gods of the forest live here. I want to ingest their verdant settlements until they carpet my cavities and convert my raptorial self into its own ecosystem, off into the green. That's the body's uncontested need to devour, an explanation. So thank you for that. And I believe there was also something in the art section before I forget that we wanted to cover in about Alfred Boe, right? So Claire, this was a clue. Carla Baranakis wanted me to ask you about Alfred Boe. Is that?
Alfred Boe. Total transparency, Alfred Boe is a friend of mine who also happens to be one of the leading tenors in the United Kingdom and therefore the world. Classically trained tenor who would give anything to be a rock star. He does not let the genre define him, and he has performed around the world in rock operas like with The Who, and also operas like La Boheme on Broadway, and as Jean Valjean in Les Miserables, both on Broadway and the West End. Alfie is a stunning, stunning talent, and he's a sweetheart. He loves music, and he doesn't tolerate anyone who says this kind of music is bad, that kind of music is bad. He says all music is good, and we should embrace it. And I smiled when I saw the classical music lead in the paper today, because that's a classically trained tenor who's running around the world trying to bring attention to his field, if you will. He's also an Order of the British Empire and said to be Queen Elizabeth's favorite tenor. Now, whether that's Alfie's urban legend or not, I cannot say, but he is really embraced by the royal family, by all of the United Kingdom, and by his fervent followers here in America.
Thank you, Claire. Appreciate that, and thank you, Carla, for that tip. I wanted to make sure that we let people know about next week's show as well. Next week, our guest is going to be Anthony DePalma, who is a former 22-year reporter for the New York Times, a foreign correspondent with a focus on Latin America, Mexico, and Cuba. Sri Srinivasan will be back to host the show, and we certainly encourage you to join us then. Claire, I want to make sure we close and talk a little bit about circling back to some of what we talked about in the beginning, and John Lewis's quote, "Do not get lost in a sea of despair, be hopeful, be optimistic. Our struggle is not the struggle of a day, a week, a month, or a year. It is the struggle of a lifetime. Never ever be afraid to make some noise and get in good trouble, necessary trouble." You've certainly gotten into good trouble in your career, famously being thrown out of the San Diego Padres locker room, trying to cover the playoff game there. Can you talk a little bit about the role of the George Floyd protests, what your thoughts are in terms of the arc of history? Where are we? There's so much work that still needs to be done. We have made some progress. What is your take on that?
Well, I truly believe that for every step backward, every tragic event, we are offered the opportunity to take many positive steps forward. George Floyd certainly did not volunteer to be the martyr of his time. He has become that, sadly for his family, sadly for all of us. But if we miss the opportunity to honor that sacrifice, then shame on us. And I think that John Lewis's passing reminds us that there are many opportunities to change the unjust things done to human beings, starting with, if you will, the symbolic. I will never apologize for wanting to see Confederate statues taken down to have us stop honoring people who acted in a treasonous and deadly manner against the United States. That said, look at what John Lewis suffered on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and look at the name on that bridge to this day. it's named after a Confederate general and a Ku Klux Klan Grand Dragon. Okay, so yes, would there be an outcry today, as much of an outcry as is growing to have that bridge named for John Lewis? Would there be that outcry without George Floyd? I think not. But if that is one of the ultimate outcomes, that we send the name of Edmund Pettus and his legacy to what I believe is the ash bin of history where it deserves to be, then I humbly thank George Floyd and his family and the millions who have risen up and said enough. I thank them because John Lewis would be immortalized with his name not only on that bridge, but his name rightfully in history books where it belongs, not underserved by history, but such as he deserves to be in all our hearts and prayers.
Absolutely. I think that renaming the bridge is the least we can do to honor John Lewis's legacy. That would be an incredible move on our part as a nation. And as Laura Silverman is saying, the bridge name must change. In terms of how far we've come, I think that we'd be remiss if we didn't share really the incredible moment that Claire had in her life. Just a few years ago, being inducted into the writers' wing of the Hall of Fame. I think just bringing back this image and showing, taking us back, being honored at Cooperstown. That look on your face, Claire. This is what we want people to focus on. This is the hope. This is the future that we have. Can you tell us a little bit about what that was like, getting that call, being inducted, being honored by the Baseball Writers Association of America with the J.G. Taylor Spink Award?
The baseball writers they're my family. The men and women that make up that organization, the men and women that I grew up with, came of age, grew older with, they're my family. So to be honored by my family, by people who understood what every step of this journey is, what it means, what our obligations are to our profession, who understand more than anyone else out there. It means the world to me. It really does. We've all made sacrifices. Our 162 game regular season and a postseason that seemingly is without end now. In a normal year, it deprives you of time with your family. It takes a toll in that you're writing hundreds and hundreds, if not at least a good 1,000 articles, bylines. You're serving in cold trucks on the broadcast side. You're on the road. And yet, like I said, for lack of imagination, I can't think of anything I'd rather do or any group I'd rather walk that walk with. So the Baseball Writers Association of America, to stand up there and represent that group, that talented, amazing group, and to be honored by the writers was amazing. I was also on the stage that day with Rachel Robinson, and I cannot tell you, you talk about circle coming full circle, to be there with Jackie Robinson's widow. Miss Rachel was being honored as the Buck O'Neill award winner for her lifelong service and humanitarian effort on behalf of baseball. It just warmed my heart to such an extent. And to be on the stage with some of the most amazing performers, players that this nation has ever seen. Frank Robinson, Sandy Koufax, Joe Morgan, and on and on. There were so many Hall of Famers there who honored me by sitting out in that July sun. And it was just, I'm without words.
Well, I want to borrow some of the words from people watching, some of whom you might know. Tina Smith, well-deserved award, Claire. Tina is someone you know?
Tina is my cousin, but we Smiths, we're all cousins. So
yeah.
Tina and I met because of our love of Alfie Boe, and yeah, Tina's my girl from Chicago.
Sure. And then Apollo, Ali, that's so awesome and sweet. Congratulations. Stuart Sneath commented earlier, a longtime friend of yours, Hall of Fame woman. I went to work late that December day to watch that historical moment in baseball history. So certainly a great comment. Sonny Slaughter also sharing, bravo, Claire Smith, you are a living legend. I'm grateful for your courage and commitment. And Sujana Chandrasekhar, again, co-host of She's on Call, which will start at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. What a joy and honor to be recognized by your peers. And Ellen echoing those thoughts. Carla remembers that day as well at the Hall of Fame in 2017. And Laura Silverman adding fantastic. I do want to mention, we talked about John Lewis, of course, earlier. And I want to make sure that we also recognize the loss of C.T. Vivian, who also passed away just before John Lewis earlier the day on Friday. Another lion of the civil rights movement. It is a generation that we are losing. John Lewis was the last living person who spoke at the March on Washington. So we certainly recognize the passing of that generation. Before we close, we'll take care of some business. Thank our sponsors again, but just want to make sure, Claire, you have the chance of sharing any last thoughts. So I'm going to thank our sponsors and then come back to you for the closing real quick. So again, we want to make sure that folks know how much we appreciate our sponsors and the work that they do. Muckrack is a great sponsor, and they work with Shri to put together his Fundamentals of Social Media course for journalists, PR pros, really anyone. You can get a free certification at mrac.co/social. Detailed instructions on how to get the most out of Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube. So please check that out at mrac.co/social. And then we also want to thank Magic Bus USA. Magic Bus imagines a world where children break out of poverty and lead fulfilling, rewarding lives, contributing to their community and to the world around them. As you can see, 7 out of 10 adolescents do not have a higher secondary qualification. 6 out of 10 youth do not have the soft skills necessary for employment, and 3 out of 10 girls are married before they reach the age of 18. These are stats, of course, in India. In addition to Muckrack, Magic, and Magic Bus USA, we also want to thank Strategy Focus Group for being a sponsor. Strategy Focus Group is a global team of human capital strategists committed to helping organizations solve people issues within your organization. They do that by working alongside you to solve your toughest problems and helping you capture your greatest opportunities. Thank you again to Muckrack, Magic Bus USA, and Strategy Focus Group for being sponsors of the New York Times Read Along. If you're interested in learning more about their work, please follow these links, readalong.link/muckrack, readalong.link/magicbususa, or readalong.link/strategy focus group. And a big shout out to Greg Gallant, Mike Schneider from Muckrack, Prednia Haldapur from Magic Bus USA, and of course, Ron Thomas from Strategy Focus Group. Thank you so much for your support. With that, I'd like to have Claire, give Claire the last word. Any closing thoughts on this time, on Representative Lewis, on what you've learned in your career? The floor is yours, Claire.
Well, thank you very much. And it's a solemn time, and yet, as Mr. Christoph wrote, it's also a time of hope. I will never lose hope. I will always be grateful that organizations, journalism organizations like the New York Times are there to allow the various voices to show the world the possibilities. And just for a great place to grow up, the New York Times gave me my voice. I am grateful for that. John Lewis was one of the many, many icons who gave me the will to fight, who taught me how to fight, taught me how to make good trouble. And I will always remember that and thank them profusely. Rest in power, John Lewis, and thank you, New York Times Read Along. Thank you, Neil.
Thank you, Claire. Absolutely. And we can't thank you enough for joining us today. Therese Steiner, wonderful to virtually meet you. Congratulations on all your accomplishments. You are indeed a pioneer and inspiration to us all. I think she definitely took the words out of all of our mouths. And, I will personally just wow. I've kept it in all day, and I know from talking to Carla, I can't explain how much of an honor and a privilege it has been to share this show with you. As a baseball fan, just to see. I remember when you were inducted. I remember seeing the news. No idea that I would have the incredible honor to speak with you and to learn from you and to be able to hear your stories about baseball, my beloved Yankees. Hearing you talk about the locker room and where people's locker rooms were situated just gave me goosebumps. And I don't know if that's something that you can really convey. I grew up idolizing Willie Randolph. Played second base in the Little League, and to hear you mention his name is just incredible. But more than that, just the work that you put in, what you represent, the stories that you've written, your focus on the craft of journalism. Just thank you so much, Claire. Just thank you for your time and your graciousness and being so generous with your insights.
Thank you. You humble me, Neil. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I want to make sure that the folks that Sonny Slaughter, what a wonderful show. Welcome to the family, Claire. You certainly are part of the New York Times Read Along family now. Ellen Austin, a fabulous program. And Cinzia, congratulations from Italy, from Milano. Mark Lee, a powerful story. Apollo, awesome show. Rose Horowitz, who leads a great movement on Twitter, Women to Follow. She is identified, I believe it's over 1,000 people on a Twitter list of women to follow on Twitter. to make sure that we hear their voices and amplify their voices. So certainly follow that. Ron Thomas, thank you. Another great experience. Ron logs in from wherever he is when he's traveling. He's in Dubai now, but thank you. Not only was he a guest on the show, but he became a sponsor because he believes in it so much. Janine, even Sujana, even though I'm a Yankee fan, great show. Thank you, Sujana. And Steve quoted me, wow, just wow. And that's what Steve was thinking as well. So with that, we'll close today's show and encourage everyone to join us again next week when we have Anthony DePalma on the show. And I just want to make sure that folks get the look of Claire. Claire Smith, if you're joining this halfway through, please go back and watch the beginning of the show, not just for Claire's insights, but also our tribute to John Lewis at the beginning. Thank you for spending your Sunday morning with us, and we'll see you again next week at July 26th at the same time. Anthony DePalma, the 22-year New York Times reporter, foreign correspondent, and with a focus on Latin America, Mexico, and Cuba. We will close with this ad for She's on Call, which will start at 11 a.m. Eastern Time today. Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Dr. Sujana Chandrasekhar. I'm an ear, nose, and throat surgeon in New York City and New Jersey.
And I'm Dr. Marina Kurian. I'm a general surgeon in New York City area.
We'd like to introduce you to our new show, She's on Call. We air live on social media platforms from 11 a.m. to noon every Sunday Eastern Time. We discuss the medical topics of the week.
We have two great guests, experts in their field that help us analyze and look at some of the topical issues of healthcare. And we are on 11 to 12, so please join us.
We'd love to answer your questions, so please share and watch and send us your questions and comments.
See you Sundays at 11.